Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum and welcome to Diplomatic Enclave. I'm your host, Omer Khalid. But as is the norm with our series, we interview ambassadors, prime ministers, ministers from different countries, as well as heads of different international organizations that are working in Pakistan. We ask about what the organization stands for, how important is its work across the world and in Pakistan, and what is the different angle or different avenues of collaboration between the organization or the country and Pakistan. Today is of course no exception. We have with us the country representative or the resident representative of an organization that is under the umbrella of the United Nations. This organization was developed on the 22nd of November in 1965 by merging of two other organizations. The first being the Expanded Program of Technical Assistance that was itself launched in 1949, and the Special Fund that was launched in 1958. So both these organizations merge, and in 1965 emerges the United Nations Development Program. This program helps countries alleviate poverty, achieve human development, also protection of human rights is one of the aspects that it works on, and capacity development as well as women empowerment. I think these are extremely important avenues of this important organizations under the umbrella of the United Nations. To talk more about that, to talk about what the UNDP exactly does in Pakistan, what it has been doing across the world, we've been joined by the resident representative of the UNDP in Pakistan, His Excellency Samuel Rizk. Mr. Rizk, thank you very much to have joined us.
Thank you very much, Omer. Thank you to Diplomatic Enclave and PTV. I'm happy to be here and pleased to spend the next few minutes with you, obviously.
The pleasure is all ours, Mr. Rizk. First of all, you're new to Pakistan. How has your experience been so far?
Oh, wonderful so far. A very warm reception from the colleagues here in the office, from our government partners, from our donors, from the community. Maybe it's because I come from Egypt. There's a certain sense of familiarity with culture and the context, the economics, society. So I've really had a very soft landing here and very much appreciate it and looking forward to the next few years.
A personal question. You have a PhD in conflict studies. Then you've served as head of conflict prevention, peace building and response institutions at the UNDP Crisis Bureau in New York. You have been the country director of the UNDP in Syria. You've been in Yemen as well. What brings you to Pakistan? A, how have those experiences been for you? B, and third, how similar is Egypt or Yemen or being there with being in Pakistan?
Thank you very much. Good question. So I think, since you mentioned a few things that I've done over the past years, you'll notice that one of the things that I bring to Pakistan is this idea that I've worked in national contexts, in regional hubs, UNDP's regional hubs, and then in global headquarters type settings, a global policy network, a regional hub, and serving as a country director, and in different kinds of capacities in different offices. So that's one thing that's important for UNDP, an organization. You mentioned some of its history, but now an organization covering 170 countries nearly. The ability of representatives to bring to a country like Pakistan an experience from a country, from a region, from headquarters is really quite important. It's important to know what to ask for, what are the kinds of capacities that exist in our organization to ask for in terms of support. It's important to be able to cover the global thematic areas that UNDP is part of. We have a 2022 to 2025 UNDP strategic plan, and I think that's an important opportunity for UNDP Pakistan to set its frame of programming for the next few years within the global context. But you asked me about my experience in some of these crisis countries, and I'll tell you what it means to me and what I bring to Pakistan. I think the most critical and important part is the need to work now in any development context with a sense of urgency of crisis response. If we believe the kinds of talking points that we write, the briefing notes that we write, if we are alarmed about the data points, if we are alarmed about the dipping indices, we'll talk a little bit more about that, then the urgency of development programming as if we are working in crisis contexts is really what I see that I bring now to Pakistan at this particular point. So I'm very happy, I'm very privileged to be here. I'm here at the start of our 5-year country program. So I have 4.5 years to basically implement this program alongside our national partners.
We talked about your country program. Tell us a little bit about the UNDP's Pakistan country program or new country development program that you said starts this year, in fact.
Sure. So the country program is the framework of programming, development programming agreed with the national counterpart, the government of Pakistan, for a particular duration of time. In this case, the country program that we have now starts in 2023 and goes until the end of 2027. 5 years, $270 plus million along these 5 years. And it covers 4 big thematic areas: a particular focus on governance, a particular focus on economic transformation and growth, a focus on gender, and of course, which is probably most critical at this point for Pakistan, is the focus on climate change and resilience. So it's along these 4 thematic areas that we are actually programming in the country for the next 4 years. Where we are now builds on the previous 4-year program, builds on the previous programs, and is a negotiated process so that we are fully aligned with national development programming, and we are aligned with the UN systems programming in the country, the Sustainable Development Cooperation Framework, which is the same duration, and we are aligned with UNDP's own strategic plan, the Global Strategic Plan for 2022 to 2025.
Speaking of climate change, the UNDP has been on the forefront when it comes to helping Pakistan post the floods. Could you share more details as far as that is concerned? Also, how important was the international conference on climate resilient Pakistan that happened in Geneva, and what have been the outcomes of that important moot?
Sure. No, this idea of Pakistan as a country being among the 5 most vulnerable countries in the world to climate change, I think is really quite critical. When we got to August in 2022 and the massive floods happened, I think it really showed the country and the international community how much of alarm this is for countries that are, on the one hand, the least emitters of gases that are part of the problem, but among the most vulnerable. So the devastating floods basically prompted the country and the international community to find ways to try to respond to some of this very quickly. So I think the process is really quite interesting and clear. What is typically done in a post-crisis context is that there's an assessment. In this case, it's the post-disaster needs assessment that quickly leads to a recovery framework, to a recovery program. And then in many cases, because of this opportunity for international solidarity with a country affected like Pakistan, then we go to a pledging conference like the Geneva conference that you mentioned. All of this, along with an important General Assembly resolution, also led by Pakistan, to show international solidarity, happened within a span of 3 or 4 months. So basically, what came out in the Geneva conference is, and throughout the months before, is the level of impact and shock on the most vulnerable communities here in Pakistan, the level of loss and damage, 30 plus billion in both. And it's important to talk about loss and damage because globally speaking, in the discussions around climate change, Conference of Parties 27, in Egypt and Sharm el-Sheikh, and COP28 that's coming up in UAE, there is a very lively and significant discussion happening around loss and damage. And I understand, I wasn't at COP27, Pakistan was a leading voice on what that
fund that was launched by Shahid Rahman, and she was quite instrumental as far as that is concerned.
Of course. So that I think is super important to understand, where not only Pakistan is a victim of some of this climate change work, but also a leading voice and advocacy as well. So we have the recovery framework, we have recovery programming. What also came out, which I think is very critical out of the Geneva conference, is the International Partner Support Group, IPSG, for which UNDP is the secretariat. Basically, this ability to bring donors and government around the table to account for the pledges that came out in the Geneva conference, and to be able to show the donor community, but also Pakistan's population, that in fact there's a significant effort to respond and to recover. And I think there's been a great effort on the part of the government to show that it can actually help the pledges materialize into actual funding. And I think the next step over the next few months is to show that implementation is taking place and to show that results are happening, because this definitely is what is most urgent at this point for those impacted by the floods, their lives, their livelihoods, infrastructure, housing, basic services, to recover as fast as possible. You asked a bigger question maybe about climate change and where Pakistan fits into this. I would say because of the impact of human activity on climate change, we do not have the world that we need. We do not live in a world that we want, but we appear to live in a world that we deserve. So changing habits, changing behaviors, changing policy, we'll get to this as well, changing opportunities for financing is really quite critical at this point. UNDP is at the heart of the recovery framework, along the lines or along the thematic areas or substantive areas that we work on very well. Livelihoods, certainly, recovery of infrastructure, recovery of basic services, but also, as you mentioned, Senator Rahman, on the policy front and on the advocacy front as well. None of this began with the floods of 2022. A lot of this programming actually predates that as well, but because of the nature and scale of the shock, because of its unpredictability, this is, I think, what we need to watch for in the future and be able to have adequate programming that has an early warning nature to it and enables then resilience and recovery for the most impacted people and communities.
Mr. Rizk, there was something that's very interesting, the 3 points that you put as far as what we are living in and what we deserve. But Pakistan certainly does not deserve the times that it is living in, especially in context of the climate change and the effects of the climate change that it is witnessing since 2022, even before 2022, but even more aggressively since 2022. The UNDP was also quite instrumental as far as the IPSG is concerned. How important was your role then, and how important does your role become post the IPSG?
So what I've sensed from our national partners, national counterparts, whether it's on the government or even the donor side, is a significant amount of appreciation for UNDP's role, not only as a programming agency, not only as an implementing agency on development, on resilience, etc., but its ability to convene, its ability to help the international community and government to be able to act as a secretariat. And the simple functions of a secretariat is to be able to, first of all, ensure that there's a sense of alignment from what is being planned and pledged to regular convening, to regular reporting. And I think the next 1 or 2 steps will be quite critical in terms of monitoring the kinds of results that are coming out. So we are, and our capacities here in the organization, working within the UN system, basically to support the functioning of the International Partner Support Group, to be a space for planning, turning pledges into actual finance, and being able to account for all of the good work that is being done, and in many cases to advocate for even more work.
But Mr. Rizk, you know, you talk of pledges being transformed into action. That is a huge question mark that has, as far as Pakistan is concerned, a lot of the pledges made haven't been translated into action. Can the UNDP play a more proactive role as far as that is concerned?
Yes, absolutely we can. We've done this role for many different crises before, and our role in terms of basically helping putting facts on the table, so the discrepancy between pledge and finance. And I must say, to be fair to a lot of the international donors, quite a lot of the pledging has actually materialized into different kinds of financing, whether it's the loans part or whether it's the grants part, but more definitely needs to be done. In a number of different meetings, certainly the IPSG's recent meeting, chaired by the Honorable Prime Minister, there was quite a significant amount of appreciation for the donor commitments for this. There was a significant amount of notice on the part of the donors for how much the government has actually done on its own. And I think this will always be the case turning pledges into finance in a very tight climate finance and development finance environment these days. So the advocacy and policy part is important, and I think it is important for also everyone that is receiving a lot of these pledges to actually show implementation and show results that actually make a difference in people's lives.
Mr. Rizk, the UNDP has also launched a flood recovery program aligned with the government of Pakistan. Could you give us more details about that?
Our flood recovery program is part of this overall framework of response to the devastating floods. $90 million. We too are looking for the ability to continue to live up to the $90 million budget expectation. We are not there, we are not close, but we certainly appreciate where we are now. And like I said, our work here in Pakistan, especially on flood response, crisis response, is always going to be about 2 or 3 things happening at the same time. Livelihoods, small businesses with a particular focus on the most vulnerable. In many cases they are women, in many cases they are youth. And then access to basic services, and certainly in many cases infrastructure and basic service rehabilitation. A lot of this we do alongside our partners within the UN system, alongside international organizations that operate here, NGOs, and all of this is coordinated with multiple parts of the government, whether we're talking about finance or planning or climate change and many others.
All right, you talked about women while answering the last question. One of your major, how should I say, objectives is also gender. Now I'd like to, with respect to Pakistan, talk about the Amno Insaf program that works to give access to justice, especially to women in the Khyber Pakhtunkhwa province, merged areas and Balochistan. Give us a little bit more insight into this program.
Globally, UNDP does quite a lot on governance, does quite a lot on rule of law programming, does quite a lot on peace and security type issues. Here in this particular country, my sense from the work that is ongoing is that it mostly aims to promote human security, the security of individuals and communities and particular groupings that often feel that their ability to survive, to thrive, is under threat one way or another. So I think it's curious that even, understanding Amno Insaf from the perspective of Arabic, safety and equity rings quite a strong bell to me. That UNDP, even before we started the current programming cycle, has already focused on women in the context of policing, rule of law, justice, access to justice, quality access to justice, and not only from a perspective that they tend to be victims, but actually empowered enough to be themselves police women, and to have our donors and partners be able to support this, and to have the support of the government to be able to do this in particular places like PK, for example, I think is really quite important. It says a lot, I think, about how we understand gender and women's empowerment, whether it's economic or through inclusive political processes, or parliamentarians, or through the work that we do with the National Council on Women. I think all of this is important. Just last week, ourselves, alongside private sector, Jazz, and the National Council for Women's Affairs, UN Women, UNFPA, launched together Digitalization and Women in Pakistan report. And for all of the devastating and not so great indices around where we are in terms of women's inclusion in the digital space, and how in some cases it looks more like exclusion, I think there are many different opportunities that are happening that actually include women for safety and security purposes, for economic purposes, for social purposes, in this kind of digital space. So all of this just to say, in response to your program, in response to your question, our particular focus on gender is about safety and security, rule of law, is about digital, is about inclusive political processes and the work we do on elections and with parliamentarians, is about economic empowerment and many other areas.
All right. I mean, that's very important because Amno Insaf, that is justice, and of course stability or peace are two aspects that are very important not only for the female gender but for the public in general as well. And herein comes your program. You talked about this huge report that you launched with different partners as well in Pakistan, and of course the other organizations under the auspices of the United Nations. This said, when it comes to giving justice to women, that's a very important issue, whether in the social space, in the digital space, or in the real world. How has been the collaboration with the different government agencies in this regard?
From my perspective, it's been excellent so far. And I'll tell you that for many different reasons. And I think if, once we start talking about sustainable development goals and where Pakistan fits into this, I think it'll be important to see this. So alongside actually having a country program for 5 years that has a particular pillar on gender, I think that's important. In a number of the meetings that I've had so far with the government, including some of the public events, honestly, some of the first statements on the Sustainable Development Goals, with all that they include about women, the most vulnerable, etc., are actually coming from government. And I think that's really important and unique. And to go one step further, it is not just paying lip service to Sustainable Development Goals in a national setting, in a federal setting, but also in a provincial and local setting. So the fact that we actually have Sustainable Development Goals Planning Committee, Finance Committee, committees that are happening federally and provincially, I think is really quite important. So when we get to the SDG Summit that is taking place in 3 or 4 weeks in New York, when we get to the midpoint, which we are now in the Sustainable Development Goals, when we get to 2030, I think Pakistan will have quite a lot to say about its achievement of Sustainable Development Goals with a particular focus on women, minus the obvious disruption that globally everyone has had because of COVID and a few other things too.
Now, speaking of sustainable goals, this is something you've really highlighted, and you said we're going to talk in detail, and this is my next question. Sustainable development goals are very important for any country to achieve. There are certain agendas for Pakistan. This is the Agenda 2023. How important is the role that the UNDP is playing in achieving the Agenda 2023 for Pakistan, and how do you see the progress as far as the different sustainable development goals in Pakistan and how they are being achieved is concerned? Are you satisfied?
No, I think no one should be satisfied with where we are either globally or any particular country with the SDGs now, and I think there's a reason for that. Most countries seem to be doing well up until COVID, so I think COVID has had a particularly devastating impact on sustainable development goals and particular targets and achievements, and I think Pakistan did not escape that for particular reasons, obviously. It is important to see the UNDP's most recent human development reports over the last 2 or 3 years, where after rises in the level of achievement for SDG targets, we have had 2 successive years of dips in indices. Pakistan is also not escaping that as well. Pakistan could be doing well in the South, could be doing better in the South Asia context. We see the comparators, for example, on multidimensional poverty, where globally we stand and where Pakistan stands. Definitely we can be doing better there as well. So I think even with the devastating impact of multiple setbacks happening at the same time, COVID, cost of living, inflation, debt, devastating floods, all of these happening at the same time, there's no doubt that this will put a particularly difficult tax on countries who were doing well, had a pretty significant setback, and are now looking to what comes next. There is part of this aspect that is about financing, development financing, how globally speaking in many cases it has actually dipped, partly because globally speaking we are responding more and more to humanitarian crises, and that is taking out part of the development funding, and there are many different reasons. Our administrator, Akim Steiner, has been saying often that it's often not a matter of the amount of financing that there is, but the distribution of it, what we actually choose to spend on. And I think there are many different aspects of how we can be much more creative on climate finance or development finance. And we have obviously an SDG climate finance and investment facility that just started here in partnership with our national counterparts, because it's not a matter often of quantity, it's also a matter of quality, and it's also a matter of being innovative as well about how we work on achieving SDGs.
You talked about the multidimensional poverty index. Let me give a bit of insight and then I'll ask your opinion. The latest update as far as this MPI or the Global Multidimensional Poverty Index is concerned, with estimates for 110 countries, was released in July. That is in last month by your organizations, that is the UNDP and the Oxford Poverty and Human Development Initiative at the University of Oxford. The report demonstrates that poverty reduction is achievable. That is a very important point. However, the lack of comprehensive data over the COVID-19 pandemic poses challenging in assessing immediate prospects. Now, there are 2 points that I take from it. Poverty reduction is achievable and lack of comprehensive data as far as COVID-19 pandemic is concerned. How is the UNDP working towards removing these obstacles?
So the last pieces of data that have gone into the multidimensional poverty index for Pakistan, I understand, came from 2017, 2018. So that, I think, is a particular lack. We collect data here in Pakistan alongside our national counterparts to be able to do national human development reports, the last of which was 2 or 3 years ago, and more will be coming. More and more of this data needs to be collected for the SDG summit annually and then leading into the 2030 agenda as well. Developments like the census help us more along these lines. Our engagement with multiple parts of the government, whether it's on the finance or planning or climate change, economic affairs, etc., helps us to do this. And I've never seen an unwillingness at this point to not share data, but it's about being able to find data and keeping it up to date and accurate, and for it to actually make sense. So the fact that we have 1 or 2 or 3 years lagging of data doesn't help us much. But as you indicated, it actually is possible. So in 88 of the cases that actually stood out for the multidimensional poverty index, there are countries that have actually been able to address some of these different dimensions differently. It is important, I think, for the audience to understand why we call this multidimensional poverty, because we're no longer looking at averages or income or how much money you actually have in your pocket. But multidimensional poverty is about the standard of living, education, and health. So curiously enough, you may actually look like from an income perspective, you have money, but you're not doing well on education or on health, whether it's access to it or whether it's the quality of it. Inflation might hit you almost immediately. This country and a lot of other countries have been hit by significant inflation, decreasing the purchasing power, which makes life very, very difficult, especially for the most vulnerable as well. So I think a fair look at SDG 1, ending poverty, will require an extensive investment in issues related to poverty in the most impacted communities. Now, curiously and unfortunately, when the devastating floods hit, they hit the most poor. And this is also typical of a lot of countries around the world.
You know, but that is so typical. It's always the lower middle class and the poor section of society that are hit the most by any crisis.
Of course, which basically says that we need to find ways to protect these most vulnerable communities from inevitable shocks. I think this idea of flooding, whether it's from the river or monsoon rains or something else happening, is no longer a matter of if, it is a matter of when. So that's why quite a lot of our recovery framework is about resilience, resilient institutions and services, communities and people, and I think that's the best way to actually help save them from these inevitable recurrences that will actually happen, so that not every time something happens we start from scratch or start from the very bottom, but actually be able to preserve what we have. It is no longer enough, I think, for development practitioners or development partners or national counterparts, and it's not even fair to think that getting by is okay. I think we need to constantly think about getting ahead, and getting ahead will require the best ways of protecting the most vulnerable.
When you talk of getting ahead and protecting the most vulnerable, does it differ from country to country? Are the generalities or the basic reasonings or the methodologies different in different countries, or is there a general base that is similar all across the world, and then there are points that differ from country to country?
It is absolutely different from country to country. I think what remains the same across all of UNDP's programming all over the world are the principles. Principles like dignity, resilience, sustainability, national ownership, national empowerment, resilient institutions. These are, broadly speaking, across the entire world are the same. The way we actually put together development solutions always has to be a little bit different. It differs if you are a middle income or lower middle income country. It differs if you are landlocked or small island development states. Your level of exposure is different. Your ability to prioritize and invest is different. Your ability to access financial markets is different. And so I think one of the ways that I presented to you our country program for Pakistan is a tailored approach that is on the basis of what the government also is looking to the UN system to do. It has the bigger picture of all of the different parts of development actors coming together, and what we are able to do on the basis of our mandate and our financing and an extensive level of human resource capacity, national human resource capacity in this country office here.
All right, when you talk of human resource capacity, how satisfied are you when it comes to Pakistan?
Absolutely satisfied. I see Pakistani colleagues in this office who are very well capacitated in terms of their knowledge, their skill, their experience. Globally speaking, I've been exposed to a lot of colleagues from Pakistan in international positions within the UN system, within UNDP, and I think they always stand out to me. We have a very large country office here. I think it's probably the second biggest in Asia Pacific region in terms of budget and budget delivery. And I think that's basically owed to the level of capacity and commitment that exists in the country.
All right, Pakistan is a beautiful country, and I'm sure within the time that you'll spend here, you'll get to see our beautiful mountains, our deserts, our palaces, and all the different variety that Pakistan offers. I hope you've had the mangoes this year during the summers as well. They're one of the best in the world. Pakistan, with its beautiful landscape, and of course increasing tourism is also something that we need more. That is tourism. Brings us to the point concerning ecotourism in Pakistan. In your point of view, not in your, but I'd like your take on the interventions that your organization has taken as far as ecotourism in Pakistan is concerned. What have been the most important pointers for Pakistan? What have been the successes in that regard?
So I think, the fact that UNDP works on ecotourism is probably part of the conservation and preservation agenda, and it's part of the development agenda. So these offer our work on ecotourism. These particular projects offer a livelihoods opportunity, offer a training opportunity for young people as managers, as conservation specialists. And we have a project that is actually ongoing now that actually covers 6 districts and 170 of these ecotourism spots, where national and international tourists can come and see the magnificence that you mentioned just right now. But I think the advocacy dividend of these kinds of programs are important. The glaciers are really quite critical, beautiful, a site for people to visit and to preserve. And at the same time, we have a project called the Glacier Lake Outburst Flood, because these are becoming natural occurrences.
GLOF, as we see
GLOF.
it.
And now we're in the second phase, so we call it lovingly GLOF 2.
All right.
GLOF, the incidence of GLOF is becoming more severe and recurring more, 77 of which were last year. Minister Shari Rahman and I last week, I think, or the week before, together launched a publication called Fading Vistas, which shows the beauty of the glaciers, and we took this opportunity to together advocate for the particular support that is needed for this project, not only as a preservation of pretty pictures, but as a preservation of an ecosystem that is critical, and also to assist in the knowledge and advocacy around disaster and the disaster risk management. And the project has many different aspects to it. It has a software aspect, so capacity building. It has a hardware aspect, so actual early warning systems and tools. And then the launching of this particular publication is the advocacy aspect of it.
Now, speaking of climate change again, because we're coming back to the topic, what is the SDG investment in climate financing facility that the UNDP has established? Tell us a little bit of some details about it for our viewers.
So this is where an innovative approach to attracting finance comes into place, and this is where Pakistan also stands out. So globally speaking, UNDP has been seized with this opportunity of finding different ways to actually add to and expand and multiply climate finance for particularly impacted countries like here. So the fact that there is a facility here that focuses particularly on development investments and climate investments, on ways to attract more investment, on ways to find innovative ways of doing this. So green and blue bonds, debt for nature swaps, these kinds of things are really quite important. So very happy that the government itself is investing in this. We are investing in this. And the dividend hopefully will be that we have bankable projects that we put on the table that are quality assured, that have had all kinds of different feasibility assessments done for them, where an investor, public or private or multilateral or bilateral, can come and say, I actually want to support Pakistan through this facility because I believe this is the right way to invest and also to address many different issues of climate change that are happening.
Now, speaking a bit more generally, coming out of Pakistan and talking globally, the UNDP has deployed around $500 million of global environment facility funds to ramp up the fight against biodiversity loss and climate change. The Global Environment Facility, otherwise known as the GEF, pledged the highest funding in history with $1.4 billion trust fund, and the latest and the least developed countries fund, which directed more than $500 million to support 88 countries through the UNDP. As far as these are concerned, do you feel that these amounts, although quite significant, have had the achievable results? Do you feel in the coming years you'll be needing more from all the countries involved?
We have to do much more for sure. Pakistan already benefits from a number of what are called vertical funds, climate and environment, and I think always stands out not as only a recipient of some of these funds, but also as a country that has quite a lot to offer others. So this environment, this GEF amount that has just come through has a particular focus on biodiversity, agriculture, maritime issues, marine life, all kinds of different things, many of which actually relate to the work that is possible here in Pakistan. And this, I think, is an important opportunity that we should not miss, that the world should not miss, from these vertical funds that actually offer this innovative way of doing all of this kind of conservation work.
Now you talked about poverty. Now speaking of poverty, over the last 3 years, poverty rates in poor countries have surged, and you have seen that in the different reports that have come forward, with the number of additional individuals living on less than 3.65 US dollars a day reaching 165 million. That is a staggering amount, 165 million by 2023, as far as a new policy brief from your organizations, that the UNDP is concerned. The name of that program that you've talked about as well, the report, the human cost of inaction, poverty, social protection and debt servicing 2020 to 2023. Now, in response to all of this crisis that you are seeing, and this could exacerbate in the years to come as well, the UNDP, that is again your organization, calls for an adaptive social protection and a debt poverty pause to redirect debt repayments towards critical social expenditures. There's a lot of tongue twisters in that, so really sorry if I do make some mistakes. How achievable is that? The debt poverty pause.
So I think a lot of the issues around debt have been really quite critical for UNDP. So one of the things that I mentioned are debt for nature swaps. I think if you look at a country like Pakistan that actually has a debt challenge, this is a well-known issue, and at the same time has a climate change issue. What happens if you actually put both together and offer ways to actually swap your debt for climate investments? This is the kind of work that we are talking about in UNDP, because there are particular opportunities for countries like Pakistan. I think this is important. I think what, globally speaking, the advocacy point is around issues of debt is that they are unsustainable, that with every crisis it gets worse.
Inflation increases.
Inflation increases. It takes away from the ability of the government to prioritize on social protection schemes, whether it's cash, whether it's services, whether it's other ways of protecting the most vulnerable. And I think this is a critical issue. For UNDP as an organization, this is a global advocacy issue. This is a development finance issue. And at the same time, like I said, there are ways that we can think innovatively about how to actually address issues of sovereign debt crises.
All right. So do you feel Pakistan could be one of the prime examples where you could work around so that we could come out of the different issues that we are and become economically stable?
Absolutely. My sense from discussions with the ministers, the secretaries, and a lot of others who understand a lot of this work is that they are actually going in that direction, finding ways and solutions in very difficult negotiations, obviously, to be able to be independent, eventually debt-free, and to be able to put the right kinds of investments that actually make a dent in poverty or other areas.
It has been a very interesting conversation, Mr. Rizk. Finally, before we end our show, what would your message for Pakistan be?
My message for Pakistan would be caveated by the sense that I've only been here for 3 weeks.
But you understand Pakistan, I think, much better than others do because of your background, because of the other countries that you've served in.
I would say the following. I think what I've seen so far, and I think what I would like to work on with the colleagues in the country office and within the UN system and with our partners, is probably the following. The level of ambition for what we can do on the development agenda in Pakistan is high, and I think that is the right way to go. The capacities and the political will that exists in the country to be able to reach that ambition, I think is there. And I think it is basically a function of how much work we are able to do, how much we are able to preserve and promote the resilience of the institutions and the communities in the face of these inevitable shocks, so that we don't keep starting from scratch. So for me, I am quite hopeful. I'm looking forward to the next few years of being here. And obviously being here for 3 weeks, I will start spending a little bit more time obviously outside of Islamabad to see the kind of work that we are doing outside of here, which I believe will likely be full of really, really good results.
We wish you all the very best, Mr. Samuel Rizk, and we look forward to a lot of productive development under the auspices of the UNDP while you will be serving here. The different aspects of the programs that the UNDP is working in puts forward a lot of hope for a future of countries such as Pakistan in the realm of the development, in the realm of the coordination, collaboration between your organization and Pakistan. And Pakistan has reaped a lot of benefits in the past, and I think it will continue to empower itself in different fields thanks to the support and the collaboration of the UNDP. Thank you very much, Mr. Samuel Rizk, to have joined us. Ladies and gentlemen, that was Mr. Samuel Rizk, resident representative of the UNDP in Pakistan. We had a lot of productive discussions on the different programs that the UNDP is developing for Pakistan, has developed in Pakistan, the challenges that remain, and how both the UNDP and Pakistan are working together in order to surmount these challenges. That is what everything is all about, you know, that is what human nature is all about, surmounting challenges and emerging victorious, and inshallah we will. With that, we come to an end of today's Diplomatic Enclave. We'll see you inshallah next week with another guest in another environment. Till then, stay safe. Allah Hafiz. And Mr. Rizk, thank you very much from the bottom of our heart to have joined us, to have talked to us in such an eloquent manner, and to have detailed so many aspects of the UNDP in Pakistan.
Thank you very much, Omer. I appreciate it, and looking forward to continuing this collaboration, obviously when we have even more results to share with you and the audience.